Welcome to the Board of Education meeting. We already met in executive session and did the salute to the flag in there. So at this point, we're up to the roll call on the agenda. Mr. McLaughlin?
Mr. Byrne? Here. Mrs. Swerner?
Here.
Mrs. Gray?
Here.
Mrs. White?
Here.
Mrs. Richmond?
Here.
Mrs. Korn?
Here.
Mrs. Wooltrich?
Here.
Mr. Syatt?
Here.
Mrs. McCune?
Here.
Madam President?
Thank you. I'm just going to draw everyone's attention to, we have to go to make a move to regular session.
We did that.
Okay, so I'm going to draw your attention to the statement of public notice in your agenda. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just wanted to point out that we welcome input from the public. There are 2 times during the regular meeting that the public is invited to speak. The first is near the beginning of the meeting, where the board is having public comment on agenda items. You can speak on anything that is on the agenda. The second time is towards the end of the meeting, and that is the time when public comment can be about anything. In terms of tonight, we're having a demographic report in the beginning, and the board will ask questions right after the report, and then we'll come back up here. If the public has questions or comments about the demographic report, the first public comment would be the time to come up and do that. If you come up to public comment, there is a clipboard down there. If you could sign your name and address and tell us your name and address when you come up, that would be helpful. We have our student representative next, RJ Milligan.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to report that it's been a weird couple weeks, kind of just getting back from break and everything with having snow days and just having breaks. It's just been weird, but now we're getting towards the end of the marking period, and everyone's really just starting to grind, having the rest of the week to get all their grades up and have everything finalized. And it's hard to believe that we're already halfway through the year. It's going to be the end of the second marking period, and it really feels like everything's just flying by, especially for us seniors, and senioritis is definitely starting to set in. A lot of people are already coasting, knowing where they're going to college and everything, and it's kind of not great, but it's starting to happen. A lot of people can see it. And last Friday, we had the Winter Dance Showcase, and there was great turnout. Miss Branda put on a great show like she always does, and everyone really loved it. And it's hard to believe, but hockey already has their senior night coming up this weekend, and it feels like winter season just flying by right like that, and all the sports are already looking towards playoffs, and it feels like everything just started, but it's really crazy how everything is just flying by.
Thank you. Do any board members have questions for RJ? I have one question. I'm just curious, we spoke with some of the students earlier on, and you guys were getting used to Aspen. How do you find it now that you had a whole marking period down? Is it better now, getting used to looking for your grades on there and using it?
There's still some issues with it. I know the teachers are still complaining about it a little bit. Like today even, I was talking to some teacher, and the grades already went out for them. They normally don't finalize until a week and a half after the marking period ends, but it just sent out for some reason, and she was kind of annoyed about that. But we're getting more used to it, and it's getting easier to work with, but there's still some kinks that we have to work out.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for your report, and as usual, you're free to stay or leave if you want to. Okay, at this time, the board is going to go down and sit in the audience for our board presentation. Tonight we have Dr. Richard Grip from Statistical Forecasting LLC, who is going to present a demographic report that the board had asked him to prepare. His company has done demographic reports for 80-plus districts in New Jersey, so we're very eager to hear what he has to say. We're going to move down below.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Richard Grip from Statistical Forecasting. I just want to open up by saying this is the most beautiful auditorium I've ever been in. As a former and current thespian, I would have loved to perform in a place like this. It's absolutely spectacular. Just as a little bit of an overview of what we'll be talking about tonight, this is a demographic study that was performed for the district and finished up just before the end of the year in December. And it took a few months to complete. And I'm going to ask that any questions from the board be held to the end of the presentation. I figure it's going to take somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. The actual length of the report is about 85 pages, so to try to condense a lot of that in a short period of time is not so simple. So I'm only going to go into the highlights of the report. If you really want to get into more detail, I'm sure the board will post it at some point in time. So a little bit about my company. First of all, it's called Statistical Forecasting, and this is the 20th year we've been in operation. And I have a little bit of a local roots in this area. I used to teach at Bridgewater Raritan High School, physics and statistics, so it's nice to always be back in Somerset County. But our firm has done about 100 of these districts in the New York, New Jersey area, and our company is currently the demographer for the New York City Public Schools, the largest school district in the country. So we see a lot of this type of work from small districts to large. About myself, I'm the executive director. I have a doctorate from Rutgers University Graduate School of Ed in Educational Statistics and Measurement. Most of us that get that type of degree wind up working for ETS or the College Board in what we call psychometrics. I decided to take a more applied approach because the superintendent at Bridgewater at the time, his name was Joe McGarry, told me that I should consider my research and my dissertation on school demography issues because it was a very small niche field, and the man was right. There's not too many of us that do this kind of stuff. It's been a fun and enjoyable career. I present nationally, internationally on this type of subject and testified at ALJ hearings in the state. And you might wonder what a demographer would be doing at a place like that. But in New Jersey, if a school district wants to divorce another district, if they have a sending-receiving agreement where they send their students, for instance, to a high school on a tuition basis, you just can't walk up and get out. You have to go through the courts to get out of it. And I get pulled in for racial impact and things like that. So anyway, let's talk about the study in general. So when a demographer comes in and does a demographic study, the first thing everyone's always interested in is how many kids are we going to have in 5 years, 10 years, whatever number people like to think about. Well, that's only one piece of the study. So the purpose of this study was to project enrollments for a 5-year period from 2018-19 out to 22-23. And the question I always get is, why can't we do a study looking at 10 years out or 15 years out? Well, the big problem that we run into is that when you want to look at enrollment 10 years out, you have to start projecting kids that haven't been born yet because they become your kindergarten students 5 years later. And we do project births in very large places such as New York City. But for a township of this size, the reliability would not be that great. So the Department of Ed wants us to only look at a 5-year window. So other things that were looked at in this study was the district's historical enrollment trends, Bernards Township's birth and fertility rates, the community population trends, and the age structure of the community. So it's partly looking at the community, it's also looking at the school district. It's a blend. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Another element that we looked at was the impact of new developments on enrollment, which I'll talk a little bit about later. There's some planned and proposed development in the township. The next piece is computing student yields. Now, student yields is simply the number of children per housing unit. Different types of units yield different number of children. For instance, detached single-family homes yield more than apartments or townhouses. So I was able to construct what would be for a typical new townhome, how many children you would be able to get out of a new unit based upon your current housing stock. And the final thing is we did what's called a housing turnover analysis, where we were trying to do, in a completely independent analysis, project how many kids could be in the district, not on the traditional method of how we project enrollment, something called the cohort survival ratio method, But my colleagues in Berkeley, Cal Berkeley, developed a method of how to project kids based upon historical home sales in a community. It's a very interesting analysis. Unfortunately, due to time constraints tonight, I will not be able to go into that, but that was one of the elements that was parts of the study. So let's look at your community. This is what you're seeing right now to the left, is all census data from 1940 to 2010. I hope that's clear enough. But everything left of that vertical line is census data from 1940 to 2010. Everything to the right is projected populations of Bernards Township from an agency called the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. It's not from myself, it's from a separate agency. So what's really interesting is that the community practically doubled after 1980. Really significant growth from about 13,000 up to 26,000. You can see the 2010 census has you about 26,600. There's an estimate by the census right now at 2015 that says you're around 27,000 plus or minus. So as you can see, the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority does not expect a lot of growth in this community going out. Now, the estimate 2015 has already surpassed what's projected in 2020 and 2030, so perhaps they may need to revise their figures a little bit. The demographic profile is the next thing I look at for the community. What makes up Bernards Township? Who are you? Predominantly white, 82% white in 2010, but as you can see in 2000, it was 89% white. There's a changing demographic with more Asians and less whites that I was able to see. 14% Asian, that's the second largest racial group in the township. A little bit older than the state median. A median is the 50th percentile, so that means half the people are above that value, half the people are below. 43 in the township, 39 in the state. Almost the state median in foreign-born, 19% are foreign-born. The highest foreign-born populations in the community are from China and India. One of the most educated communities I have run across in the state, at 73% having a bachelor's degree or higher. You can see what the state median is at 37. It's also one of the wealthiest districts I've run across with median family income near 170,000, where the state median is 88. So you're about double of what the state median is. There's a little bit more than 10,000 housing units here, and about 3/4 of them are single family attached or detached. About 13% of the housing units are renter occupied. And the median value of an owner-occupied unit is $649,000, which means that half of the homes in this community are above $650,000 or so. So most of that data that I'm giving you from there is from what's called the 2011-2015 American Community Survey. So it's based on data over the last 5 years. Well, from 11 to 15, it's not the last 5 years. So here's a little map of the township, as you can see. Ridge High School right somewhere in the north central part of that map. One of the things that we did in this study was project enrollments at the elementary school level and then aggregate up to the middle and the high. So you can see the elementary zones. This is based on what we call shapefiles. The district was able to provide us boundaries of who goes where based upon what street you live in. You can see Mount Prospect is the smallest down in the southwest, but that takes a lot of the hills into consideration. That's why it's a smaller geographical area. So let's talk about the district's historical enrollment trends. As you know, this district went through a very big boom period. In the last 4 years, the current enrollment in 2017-18, this current year, is 5,407. And that number is on the state census day, which is somewhere around October 15th, plus or minus, depending upon if it falls on a weekend. So all the enrollment data you're going to see in this report is on the state census day of around October 15th. So it could change, of course, between October and now because people move in and out. But it has declined for the last 4 years, which is kind of interesting given the boom period that was. And since the peak enrollment in 2013-14, the district has lost about 350 students. So we use something called the cohort survivor ratio method to project enrollment, looking out. This is the figure of the district's enrollment. You can see in the 2013-14 year, the peak enrollment of about 57, 51.5. And you say, well, how do you get a 0.5? Well, there's some kids that are what's called shared time students. That means they spend half your time here, maybe half time in voc tech or something like that. It's usually a high school kid. So you can see in the last 4 years how the enrollment has declined. But what's really interesting is not so much at the K-12 level. When you start peeling back the layers into the PK to 5 elementary population, the middle school, and the high school is when you start to learn what's going on. The PK to 5 here is the top line, and you could see that the enrollment was fairly stable up for a period there. In the last 4 years, it's really kind of dipped down. And the last, just so I have this right, in the last 4 years, elementary enrollment has dropped by about 300 students. And that's important because we call that the window to the future. Because if the elementary enrollment is declining, eventually those students are going to move up to the middle and the high school configurations, and declines would be then occurring at those configurations as well. The middle school configuration has been fairly stable. That's the red line down at the bottom. The high school has been seeing the increasing enrollment. That's because of the boom years from 10, 15 years ago when enrollment was going up. They're finally phasing out of the system. But as you can see at the very end of that graph, you can start to see it stabilize. Okay, so it's almost like seeing into the future and back into the past all at once. It's a really interesting slide. So if one slide you want to look at all night, this is the one. So the cohort survival ratio method is the method that the NJDOE approves for us to do the demographic enrollment projections. It's not something that I've developed. It's been around for a long time. And what we do is we calculate what's called survival rates. Some people call it progression ratios because we want to make sure that everyone's actually surviving or living from one year to the next. No one's dying during this whole process. But just to give you an idea, so if you had 100 first grade students and the next year in 2017, in the second grade, you only have 95 students showing up. If you lost 5 students, or the survival rate of that grade progression from grade 1 to 2 is 95 over 100 or 0.95. We compute these survival ratios or progression ratios for all the grades, including birth to kindergarten, and we do it for a 10-year period. We look for trends. If we see values over 1, that means you're getting inward migration into the district. Below 1, it would be outward migration. So what we do is we compute those ratios, and then we take an average, usually of the last 4, 5, or 6 years, and then use those average ratios on the most recent enrollment going forward to project your enrollment 5 years out in the future. So you're basically taking those ratios and holding them constant throughout the projection period. What's interesting about your district, there's 13 ratios, birth to K all the way up through 11 through 12, those 13 of them. 10 of them were above 1, indicating that there's net inward migration into this district. So the question then becomes, well, wait a second. How could you have inward migration going on and declining enrollment? It seems counterintuitive. Well, I'm going to show you why and what's going on. You have something called kindergarten replacement going on here. And it's negative in this particular district for the last 9 years, and it's been increasing over time. What is it? Well, negative kindergarten replacement is when the number of graduating 12th grade students is more than the number of kindergarten students replacing them in the next year. So let's say you have a really large senior class of 400 students. If you only have 300 kindergarten students coming into the system the next year, you're down 100 students before you get out of the gate. Okay, and watch what happens here. You've lost an average of 168 students due to negative kindergarten replacement in the last 4 years. Look at this slide right here. It's really interesting. The value of the negative kindergarten replacement is increasing over time. It's almost 217 students in the last year. That's almost insurmountable for a district to overcome, regardless of how much inward migration you have coming into a district. So what I did was I looked at the correlation between enrollment change, which is just simply the change in enrollment, K-12, from one year to the next, and plotted it up against kindergarten replacement. Blue is the enrollment change from one year to the next. If you notice, the enrollment losses are less than the negative kindergarten replacement. So what does that mean? It means that part of the negative kindergarten replacement is being offset by the inward migration of students. If you look to the far left, there are about 4 instances where the inward migration was enough to overcome the kindergarten replacement, the negative kindergarten replacement, because it wasn't that much of a big deal back then. But as you saw on that last screen, you can see it here too, the negative kindergarten replacement is getting so big that even though you have inward migration, it's not enough to offset, and you're seeing this decline in enrollment. This is another interesting slide to keep your eye on. So why? Why are you having this deficit between 12th grade and kindergarten? It has to do with birth counts, specifically. So we use births to project kindergarten students 5 years later. I get a lot of people saying, almost every single talk I go to, well, you know, can't you guys do something better than that? Can't you do a home-to-home survey of, you know, kids that are 1, 2, 3, 4? Well, that gets kind of expensive, you know, and I'm not really into, you know, knocking on doorbells, but, you know, this is what we use in the industry. We do a correlation between births and kindergarten students 5 years later, and believe it or not, there is a relationship between the two. They have been declining in the community. The township had 367 births in 2000, only 167 in 2015. That's a significant, significant drop-off. The kindergarten enrollment has not declined as much because of the inward migration going on with parents, with the children under the age of 5, moving into the community with kids born elsewhere. This is a very, very highly desirable district. I remember a couple colleagues of mine used to work here when I was at Bridgewater, and it was still a great place to be. So you could see the drop-off, but it's not as steep as the kindergarten. The fertility rates here are lower than those of the county and of the state, but to me, that's not really the big issue. So if you look at this slide right here, it shows the birth year, the number of births for that year, number of kindergarten students 5 years later, and then the ratio from birth to K. So if in the first instance you see a ratio of 1.047 up on the top, that's simply 354 divided by 338. But what's interesting is you go down the line, where it's in red, those ratios are getting bigger in the last 4 or 5 years. And it's because, in my opinion, the home sales have finally picked up since the banking crisis of around 2008, 2009. So when you have more home sales in a very desirable community, what does that mean? It's typically not seniors that are buying the house. It's typically families that are going to be buying them with kids. And you're seeing the effect of the home resale market come in your birth to kindergarten ratios going up. And when I did this study, I'm assuming that this strong home market is going to continue in the future with parents moving in with kids under the age of 5. So there's your picture of historical birth counts. I pulled it all the way back from 2000, just so you could see the shape of this thing over a 15-year period to see that kind of decline. One of the things I mentioned at the outset is we did births by we did projections by elementary attendance areas. So to do that, we have to get births by elementary attendance area. And you may say, well, how in the world are we going to do that? Well, the Department of Health gives us data for births at the census block level, which are tiny, tiny little geographical areas. And we do something what's called an overlay between the census blocks and the elementary attendance area boundaries. And the reason I have Liberty Corner in red is because Liberty Corner Elementary School has typically had the most births for the last 12 years. They had 103 births in 2003. But take a look at 2015. Just look straight across that line. They're almost all the same, except for Mount Prospect, somewhere in the 30s and 40s. Where back just 12 years ago, you're talking 80 to 100 births in the community. So there's been a big drop-off in each one of the zones. It's not like it's happened in just one of the areas. It's been across the board. And this picture kind of shows it. This is the births mapped by census block in 2003. You're going to see the same scale used in a moment in 2015. But just so you know, the darkest regions, which show the greatest number of births per block, are in the purple and the magenta regions. That's the southwest region near where the hills are. Also in that southeast area, it's a little hard to see in the graph, where Society Hill and Cedars at Basking Ridge are located. So those are the areas. This is back in 2003. Yellows being the lowest number of births. Watch what happens now in 2015. All the magenta, all the purple, gone. In fact, even the orange spots, as you can see, have really dissipated. So, to be honest with you, you have a changing age structure in the community. And that's what's causing a lot of this enrollment decline. It's an interesting phenomenon. It's not unique to you. I see it a lot in districts that are, well, I'll talk about in a minute, district factor groups, I's or J's. But this is what your age pyramid looks like. And an age pyramid, this is Demography 101. It's really just a chart showing the number or percentage of females plotted up against males back to back, where the females are in green and males are in orange on the left. But what's interesting here, as you can see, this is back in 2000. The greatest number of people in the 2000 period were 40 to 44 for the males and 35 to 39 for the females, which there's a gap, though, in the people in the 20s, as you notice, right? There's that big hole on both sides. Why? Well, can you afford to live here if you're 25? That's hard to do when you got a $650,000 median single or home price. So this is what it looks like 10 years later. If you just toggle back and forth, you could see that the graph is actually lifting higher, which makes sense if people are staying in their homes. Now the greatest number of people are in their 40s and 50s. That's not an age, I'm 50, that's not an age where I'm having kids anymore. Okay, so it's certainly expected. And you can see that number of people in the 20s, again, is really quite small. You want to see what New Jersey's looks like? This is the age pyramid for New Jersey. What is that telling you? All right, well, New Jersey's very, very heterogeneous. Lots of different races, lots of different people of socioeconomics. When you get that, what do you get? You get a more rounded distribution. This is what happens when you're more homogeneous. More affluent, more white. That's, if I was to do this presentation in a lot of other places, particularly in Morris County, I could almost cross out Bernards Township and put in their name because it looks the same way. The district factor I's and J's, those are the most highest on the socioeconomic scale in the school districts in the state, look this way. Property taxes are killing people. So if you look at this chart before we get into the nuts and bolts, this is the change in males and females over time from 2000 to 2010. I just highlighted this to show that the areas in red are the biggest decliners. The areas in blue over that 10-year period are the biggest gainers. I look at the decliners, and it's in the 35 to 39 group for both males and females. And if you look also at, I'm just asking, hold on a second, I got a newest Windows feature update. I'm going to have to see if I can get around that. It wants me to schedule a time for a snoozing. Yeah, I've got to get back. Let's go back into there. No, don't restart. Nah. That's all right. Give it a minute. While we restart, I could talk about this probably just off the top of my head. So on that one slide, while the females and the males, the biggest decliners over that 10-year period were 35 to 39, the other big decliners were women of 30 to 34 and 25 to 29. So the area where women are having their children typically are from 25 to 39, so it's not really surprising to me that there has been such a decline in the number of births in the township. Okay, the next slide is going to be on new planned housing in Bernards Township, but I cannot do that off the top of my head, so that's okay. I prefer to let you guys see it. Thank you, though. This takes even longer than my computer. Yeah, sure. You think so?
Windows up, it can be 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're okay with that.
Well, actually, do people have a copy of this? Or,
Just the board.
but not the TV, but it's not for the television for home, so they wouldn't be able to follow along, right?
Right.
All right. All right, as I would have.
Why don't we do questions?
Okay, I have one question, just kind of elaborating on what you're talking about when you're talking about the inward migration and how that just because the population in kindergarten and below kindergarten is going down in our town doesn't mean that people aren't moving in after their kids are school age. I've talked to a lot of people lately who said they're moving here for high school, like they're coming later, they're not coming when their kids are little. So is there a way to like predict that or see that? Kind
Great
of
question. Does everybody hear that question? If you go back to one of the slides earlier in the presentation tonight, I mentioned that there are 13 ratios that were computed on an average, and 10 were above 1.00. Ironically, the 3 that were below 1 were at the high school level. So what does that mean? Well, you know, typically I would think with the choices that are around here that people are probably choosing private high school. I used to teach at Del Barton. I don't think that's that far away. It could be one of the, or Pingree or Petty. Well, Petty's too far away. But so there are choices for private high school, but not to say that this is not a good option. It's just, but we do see that over time. Oh, we're going to switch out. Good man. Try.
Do you ever see significant changes in the inward migration year over year, or is it usually a fairly steady stream of inward?
Another great question. The changes do happen over inward migration over time, but not typically in any one ratio except for one, and that's birth to kindergarten. If I gave you 20 years worth of ratios, the variation's usually in the 200s or something like, it's very, very small. But birth to kindergarten can be affected if people start, if a school district changes from a half-day K to a full-day K, you would start to see something along those lines, and that would also affect K to 1 because people aren't just showing up for the first grade, they would stay in the system the whole way. So programmatic changes are one thing that can change the ratios, but it's typically not so much things that are driven in the community unless it's maybe a housing crash or something like that, where then people maybe cannot send their kids to private or parochial, they have to go to public because they can't afford it, something like that. Yeah, I know. You can even go there and I'll figure it out from there. Thanks for doing this. Just gotta hook me up. We're back in business. Thank you. Appreciate it. Love technology, but I don't know, sometimes it doesn't always work out. But so this is the chart I was just mentioned. Again, the blue is really what's interesting. If you notice in the older population, the middle and older is where you're getting the gains. Again, that's not great for school districts that want to grow. Maybe you don't want to grow. So let's talk about the new housing that I mentioned. So I had a lot of cooperation with this. This is from the Township Planning Department, and I know I see a couple of the gentlemen that helped me with this information here tonight, so thank you. So what you see up here, Dewey Meadow, I know you know of all these because I've been reading about it in the paper as well. The Quarry Project, Crown Court, Minebrook Farm. So what I want to tell you is, well, there's about 434 units out of those 4 developments that could, I'm going to say could, potentially come online. The Quarry and the Dewey Meadow projects, of course, are the largest, and they're a mix of different types of units, whether they be apartment, townhouses, things like that. Some of the developments also have a low and moderate income housing piece, where some of the units will be set aside for folks that meet those requirements as well. So the only one that's under construction at the moment is Minebrook Farm, which is in the Liberty Corner attendance area. Now, when we talk about the number of children that will come out of these developments, they're not all going to go to Cedar Hill Elementary School or Liberty Corner Elementary School. It's just that this is the elementary zone that those kids would belong to. Of course, there's going to be kids that go to the middle and the high school. As a rule of thumb, just to give you an idea, for every student that we talk about here that is generated from a development, about 60% roughly will go to, or will be elementary students, 20% will be middle, and 20% will be high school. And it makes sense, because as a parent, I personally don't want to buy a home if I have a junior in high school and move into a new community. I'd much rather have them in elementary school. So that's the kind of distribution. It's not equal across all the grades. So, as I mentioned at the top of the show tonight, the student yields were computed by housing type to determine the impact of new developments. And what we did is we joined the district student address database with the property database of the town, marrying on the address field. And why we did that, we were trying to figure out if we were to have a new type of home in this community, how many kids would come out of it? And this is the number that we came up with. Roughly for a detached single-family home, which there's the only development, if you notice from that previous one, was the Minebrook Farm, I believe. And there's a component, I believe, in the quarry as well. But it's only it's not only, it's 1.11 kids per housing unit, and that's public school children. It's not total children, it's just public school. There could be more. That number is kind of high from my vantage point. Usually when I see detached single-family homes, it's somewhere between 0.8 and 0.9. The reason I think is because, again, this is a good place. When I see poorer districts, it can be as low as 0.6 public school children because they're not attending a school there, they're going somewhere else. For a townhouse or a condo or a duplex, around 0.3 children per unit, and for the apartments, there's only really one significant one, which is Crown Court on Monarch Circle, about 0.61 children per housing unit. I have to say the townhouse student yields, or multipliers as we like to call them, varied all over the place. So, but that value you see there is 0.30 is the township-wide average for the number of kids per townhouse unit. And of course, it really varies. It depends upon how many bedrooms there are. It depends if there's a swimming pool and kid amenities, that kind of thing. So let's talk about how many kids we could expect. And this is really a rough estimate because a lot of these developments are not set in stone yet. They have not been approved, which means developers do not have to come up and tell us, well, how many bedrooms we're going to have of each different type. Bedroom counts are really, really important as a demographer to determine how many children we can expect. So I had to make some assumptions. But roughly about 246 new public school children from those developments, and I have the breakout right behind me for each one of the developments, and of course the most would be in Dewey Meadow and the quarry. And I had a little caveat here, a little asterisk, and I said, if the townhouse yield is greater than 0.30, which is the township average, and was similar to what we saw or see in Patriot Hill or Hamilton Ridge in the hills, the average down there is about 0.75. So if it was along those lines, the number could jump to as high as 317. But that would be very aggressive, and I don't know what's going to happen. No one would really know until people start moving in. So these children are not added in to the baseline projections. And there's really threefold of reasons why I did not add them in. Number one, there's such great uncertainty of whether these developments would ever be constructed that I did not want to overinflate the projections. Number two, I did not have the availability of the bedroom distributions. As I said, I'm making some assumptions regarding that. And number three, I don't know the construction timeline. If they come in 2 years from now or 10 years from now. You need to know these kinds of parameters to make a really educated guess on how that folds into the projections. We talked about home sales, and what's really neat, this is from 1976 to 2016. We didn't have too many sales in 1970s up to about mid-1980s just because there wasn't many houses here. But notice this big rise up to about 900 plus units around 2000. Then it dives down to 375 in about 2008 due to the housing banking crisis, the housing crash. It's now gotten up to about 500 sales per year. Nowhere as near the 900 it used to be, but it has gotten up higher, and that higher number of sales, in my opinion, as I said, has increased the birth-decay ratios. So this is near the end of the presentation. As far as the enrollment projections, I'm projecting a continuation of the decline in enrollment predominantly due to this negative kindergarten replacement phenomenon. So around the end of the 5-year period, talking somewhere around 4,700 students. As a reminder, right now, you're around 5,400 students, so it's about a decline of about 700 pupils. The projected kindergarten replacement in the future is similar to what had been historically. I think it was 217 in the last year, negative, and we're expecting somewhere around negative 200 going forward. Again, very hard to overcome. So if you look at it by the elementary, middle, and high school grade configuration, the elementary level is going to take the biggest hit, again, because of this lower birth rate. Unless, again, you had a really high significant inward migration, even greater than you've ever seen historically. But even if you did, you're still going to have declining enrollment at the elementary level. So about 400 students down at the elementary level, 200 students plus or minus in Annan, and 107 students down at Ridge High School. So the one of the last slides is the capacity analysis. The capacity analysis is a computation of the relationship between enrollment and how many students the building can hold. Now, this is from your long-range facility plan, and there's 2 ways you can compute it. One is based upon a square footage allowance per student. One is based upon number of students per teacher. And that's called the district practices method, and that's the method I'm showing up here. So on the left-hand side, you're seeing the capacity for each one of the schools in the district. The actual enrollment in those buildings is right next to that. The difference between those is the third column, or the fourth column in. They're all blue because there's a surplus of seating in each one of the schools. And as you would imagine, with the enrollment expected to decline, the difference is only going to get bigger, which means you have a greater surplus in 22-23, and that's the last column as you see. If it was red, it would mean you have a shortfall of seats or a shortage of seats, but you don't have that. So let's sum up what we've learned tonight. Enrollments are projected to be lower at the end of the 5-year projection period, particularly at the elementary level, and that's really because, as we talked about, declining birth rates have led to fewer children entering kindergarten. We do have inward migration of children here with families under the age of 5. It's evident to me because of the strong birth to kindergarten ratios where typically you're getting 35 or almost 40% more children from births 5 years prior. That's what the ratio is telling me. So, but it's not enough to overcome the high negative kindergarten replacement. So, as I stated in the report, we really need to be very vigilant on the new housing that's proposed here, because the new housing, if it does come online, can change the outcome of this study. In my opinion, you're still going to have declining enrollment if they come on board. It's just a matter of how the decline would be less. Questions to the board?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have a question about the capacity slide.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering if capacity accounts for space that can be used by lots of children, but for other factors accommodates a smaller number of students.
Okay, that's a good question. So let me backtrack and tell you, I can't remember exactly what year that this is from in terms of long-range facility plan, but it's not recent if I recall. So if the school starts to, for instance, educate more special ed children, that's going to reduce the capacity of a building because you just cannot have as many special ed children in a classroom. So the capacity figures are a fluid number depending upon building usage. So whenever the capacities were developed, if it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago or whatever, this was how the building was used at that time. So unless you had an architect come through every single building and see how the building is used right now, these are ballpark capacity figures, I'm sure. So it could be different than what they are in reality.
Thank you. I have a question about the student yield numbers. Mm-hmm. Were they developed based on a single point in time snapshot or based on trends over time in the townhouses, condos, and duplexes? And I'll follow up with what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's a
if you
great
answer.
question. So since we're marrying the student address database with the property database, the student address database is the current yield. So it is a snapshot.
Okay, just on my observation, and this is not statistically valid data, but I happen to live in the Cedars, which is one of the townhome duplex communities. Just in my observation, it seems over the course of the last 10 years, more families with children are moving into that development than in the past. And in speaking with these families, it's because they wanted to get into Basking Ridge, they wanted the kids in our schools, and they couldn't afford a single-family home, or maybe their preference wasn't. So I would just be curious, if we looked at the student yields over time, is it trending upward? Because the number you talked about Patriot Hill and Hamilton Ridge being much higher, might be a little more valid if we look into the future with some of the other multi-unit dwellings. Just my thoughts.
Well, I'll just give you, I'm going to follow up with that because I have done a study for a district where we looked at yields over time, over a 5-year period. It's not that long, but what we found is that maybe it changed by a 0.02 of a point. So nothing that incredibly significant. I wouldn't expect it to change that much here just because your housing stock is quite robust. You have a lot of units here for townhouses. If it was apartments, I could see how that varied, but I don't think it would vary by a heck of a lot.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, this is fascinating. I think this is an amazing and very useful report. So
Great, I'm glad you liked it.
Hi, when you like detached single-family homes up here at 1.11, that's like the kids, and this is all anecdotal from me, because I live here. I've lived here 20 years, and after 20 years, I still have 3 kids in the school district. But, and you guys are saying that it's going down. But also in my neighborhood, which is close to here, and it's not the biggest neighborhood, but we have 4 and 5 kids living in these houses. Like, I don't mean like 2 houses, I mean like 10 houses. And I don't know if that, so this is just an average, so you're averaging in like what, the older people, and so it's like, but it just seems to me that we have, and they're all young, and our neighborhood just turned over. Just this year it seemed to have, I've been there 20 years, and the most houses have turned over since I've been there. This year. So, I mean, I don't know how, I don't know if you have the information that quickly. And, okay.
I can talk to it. I gave you the short nuts and bolts based on time. But if you go to the report, I did something really neat for data junkies out there. It's what's called a student yield by length of ownership distribution. So what it shows is that what I did is I was able to figure out when the most recent sale of every single detached single-family home in the township occurred. Now, some of them I had to throw out because, you know, when you sell the house to $1 for your spouse for whatever reason, that's not a legitimate sale. But what we find out is this, is that the greatest number of children are in the lowest lengths of ownership. So the distribution for the number of children per home ranged from about 1 to about 1.2, even higher than the 1 here, up through about 6 years of ownership. Then it starts to decline like a rock. So by about 25, 30 years out of ownership, we're only seeing about 0.2 to maybe 0.15 children per housing unit. So that number, 1.11 that you see behind me, was an average of the number of children from about 0 years of ownership up to the peak number of years of ownership, which I believe was around 6 or 7 years of ownership in the township before it started to decline. There is no metric really in our field to say, all right, well, which yield in the distribution should I use going forward if there's new housing units? So, you know, we're taking an average from the beginning up to the peak before it just drops off like a rock. So to answer your question, yeah, we are taking into consideration people who are moving in. They would be in the 0 or 1 year of ownership, and if you go to the report, you'll see how high the numbers are for lower homes that have not been owned that long. It's a really fascinating stuff when you start getting into lengths of ownership distributions.
I was just wondering, do you have any information on the percentage of all the homes in Berners Township, the percentage of homes where there are kids in school? Because I know that when I first moved here, like we were always told it was very low, you know, that it was like only in the 30-some-odd% of families in town actually had kids
Oh,
in schools. And
yeah.
I'm looking at the shifting age distribution, where you don't have as many older people and you don't have as many people like in their 20s, and you've got this bulge. And I'm wondering if those numbers may have changed over the years? Or
I understand your question, but I don't have any data on that. Yeah, no. Yeah, because you could have, you could easily take the number of public school children and with respect to the 10,000 plus housing units, but you don't know how many children are doubled up, tripled up in each house.
Yeah,
but
it was more a curiosity because it was something that was always quoted.
Yeah, no.
But the age distribution has definitely changed.
Oh yeah,
in town,
and it's not just here. Obviously, we're all aging. It's an aging society, and we're not getting the replacement of the birth rates. Just have not been what they should be. In fact, this is an aside for people who are interested in demography. You're of course, the baby boomer generation from 1946 to 64, which caused significant enrollment increases in the 70s. If you see a chart of New Jersey enrollment, you saw this big growth in enrollment in the 70s, and then we saw in the late 80s, it just plummeted like a roller coaster. And then it went up through the 90s and peaked around 2005.
Those are the millennials.
Yeah, well, what's happening is, first you had the boomers, then you had the kids of the boomers having their kids. Now we're waiting for the grandchildren of the boomers to start having their kids. That will start bringing the birth rate up. When do we expect that? Somewhere in the 2020s. But whether they're going to come through and get out of everybody's basement that they're living in, I don't know. I shouldn't have said that. You want me?
My only question was, I know the public is going to want this information, and just for their benefit, when it will be posted to our website. For next 48 hours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. At this point, the board's going to move back up, but we thank you, Dr. Grip, for this really great presentation.
Thank you.
And I'm sure if we have follow-up questions that come up later in the evening from the public or from anybody, we'll get back to you with those. We'll collect the questions, and we can do a follow-up with you for anything that,
Oh, it wouldn't be me.
I can sign it, but you're going to have to wait till the end of the meeting, okay?
Is it on now?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. So just to explain to the public what we're going to do now, because this is not our normal protocol at a board meeting, we are going to be hearing from a number of candidates who are interested in a board vacancy. When the Board of Education has a vacancy that occurs because of a board member having to resign because they're moving or something else, we have candidates come and we appoint someone to finish out the remainder of the year that that person had to leave. So in this case, this would be for the rest of the year through December. And then that person could run in the election, and it would be the normal protocol. So we're going to hear from, we have one person that's not coming on this list. So we're going to hear from 11 different people. Each one of them is going to come up to the microphone and introduce themselves and speak to us for approximately 5 to 7 minutes. And then after all of them have spoken, we're going to go into executive session to deliberate. After we come back out, then the board will make a decision, and that person will be appointed and come back up on stage with us. Okay? So we're just going to go in the order that's on the agenda, which happens to be alphabetical order. So our first candidate is Lauren Beckman.
Right here? No, the other one. The other one.
At the other microphone.
That one.
Thanks. Actually, is that on?
Hello?
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, good. I can put my notes down here.
That's right.
Okay. I used to be Garcia, and I wish I were still Garcia now. So then I'd be later in the presentation, not first. Okay, so thank you, board members, for giving me this opportunity to present my qualifications. I am what Dr. Grip called inward migration. So I'm from California. I grew up, lived there my whole life, and about 6 or 7 years ago, my husband got a job transfer, and we moved here. So education's always been really important to me, and when we moved here, the most important criteria for where we're going to live in New Jersey is a good school district. And after much research, that's why we decided to move to Basking Ridge. And we've been extremely happy here. Schools are fantastic. When we first got here, we got a call from Mr. Malika, and he asked us to come in, and he wanted to make sure that our kids were placed in the right classroom, that they'd be successful from day one. I was very impressed. It was great. And we've continued to have such positive experience in the last 6.5 years with teachers, everybody. And now that my kids are more independent, and I have 4, so I'm one of those people with all the kids. I have 4 kids, and we want to, now that my kids are more independent, I've got one off in college, and she started here in 7th grade. I want to give back to the community and help ensure that we maintain this high level of service that we've given to the community, or that we've enjoyed. From a qualification standpoint, I'm professional, hardworking, have a history of working with others effectively. I've been volunteering in a school setting in just about every capacity imaginable for almost 14 years. I've worked with kids, parents, teachers, administrators, et cetera, outside in organizations. I've taught art, I've taught PE, I've taught science, and a lot of this was in California, and part of that is because in California, the school, the budgeting for schools has gone way down in the last years, and I think I'm so grateful to be here in New Jersey, where the schools are still have money to do a lot of the things that have been cut from the California system. I also sub. I just started that last year, and it's really just to kind of stay current with my kids and their kids and kind of see what's going on in the schools. But I'm completely fine to put that aside if I get this position. So my background, I have a degree in industrial engineering from Stanford. You have my resume, but I've been a hands-on manufacturing engineer in the 80s in Silicon Valley. I've worked for Pricewaterhouse Consulting, PricewaterhouseCoopers. I was a management consultant. I managed large-scale software implementations at several Fortune 500 companies. I transitioned to the dot-com era in Silicon Valley, which was just a fantastic place to be, late 1990s. My company got bought by another company, which got bought by Oracle, and anyway, I had a great career. I loved it, but I had twins, and those were my 3rd and 4th, and I thought, okay, it's time to change. So, so I've been home with my kids since then, but I miss this kind of setting. I haven't had it for a while, and being here, you know, my career was business meetings, getting buy-in from customers and clients, creating rules of engagement, contract negotiation, working closely with upper management, and I feel like this position is like coming home to me. So I'm very excited about this. After reading about the position, I feel like the board is intimately involved in every aspect of the school district. I feel like you guys are part policymakers, part rule enforcers, part evaluators, and part cheerleaders/communicators. I'd be so proud to be part of this organization, and I feel like I could really make a difference. Like I said, we saw our schools struggle in California where they were underfunded, and we actually depended on volunteers such as myself to do a lot of the actual school functions. My husband and I were talking, he said, we came here, and I don't think some people know how good we have it here in the school district. And I think one of the first jobs is to maintain this very high level that we're at today. I think we have a great school system, and our role is to continuously improve it and look for ways, additional ways to improve. So I don't see a problem with my availability for meetings. I'm fine. I can adjust things. I'm flexible. And I see myself completing this 2-year term, definitely. I would love to do that. And then kind of see how it goes. I want to make sure that I'm adding value, and I want to make sure that my value is appreciated, and I don't see why I wouldn't continue. And like I said earlier, I'm very happy with the overall state of our district, but I've talked to my kids and their friends and others about their perspective and things that they find challenging or could be areas for improvement. And things that have come up are the alcohol, drug, vaping abuse in the schools, parking, traffic, and busing, the stressed out, overscheduled kids, class availability in the high school, a feeling that there's a focus on testing over learning, and a perception that some students cheat to gain unfair advantage. And also just the whole quarry thing. And I certainly don't want to be presumptuous and suggest that I have all the answers, but I love the group of 9, and I think 9, bringing together multiple and diverse perspectives, we can come to better conclusions than one individual. So I feel that my skills and experience are well aligned with the requirements for this position. I'm passionate about education, and I've raised 4 kids, or I'm raising 4 kids, and I believe I have a solid foundation of experience in issues affecting education. I respect rules and processes. I'm analytical. I'm an excellent project manager, both in my career and my personal life, mainly in my family right now. I'm reliable. I've always been the go-to person, the problem solver at work.
You have about a minute to go.
Okay, I'm almost done. I'm patient. I can prioritize, and I'm organized, diplomatic. I'm comfortable speaking with children and adults. And as far as the committees, I'm pretty easygoing. They all seem interesting to me, and I find that I make the best of whatever situation comes my way, and I feel like I can make a solid contribution on any of the committees. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Stacy Byer.
Hi, good evening. My name is Stacy Byer, and I'm a 31-year resident of Basking Ridge, so my whole life. Ever since I can remember, I've always had an extreme passion for education. I always knew that one day I wanted to become a teacher. I am currently a 7th grade teacher in North Brunswick at Linwood Middle School. In addition to being a teacher there, I was also appointed by my administration as part of the HIB collaboration for our district, and also the crisis team for our district. Also within my middle school, I'm the leader of our crisis team as well. I tell my students every year that half of my job is to teach them the second half of American history, and the other half of my job is to teach them to be kind, successful people who are ready to take on the world. I teach the second half through example and my daily actions. I truly believe that even on my worst days, my students always deserve my best. Once I listened to a TED Talk and I heard a saying, and I make my students say it every day, and I enforce in them that they must believe what they're saying, and they state that I am somebody, I was somebody when I came, I'll be a better somebody when I leave, I'm strong, I'm powerful, and I deserve the education that I get here. I believe that the last line is my job, to enforce that they do deserve that education. Watching 118 7th graders say that every day is powerful, to say the least. Over the 5 months that I've had this group of students, I see them believing in what they say. In addition to my time in the classroom, I'm also the advisor for Student Council and the advisor for the Positive Behavior Supports in Schools Club. I run several events and pep rallies throughout the year based on the philosophy that we must focus on the positive of all of the students. I've poured my heart into Linwood Middle School, and I would love to do the same for all Bernards Township schools. I believe the school board is a critical link between the community and the schools. The school board must set goals and maintain a clear vision for the district, short-term and long-term. The leadership provided through the board allows for a successful school year. An organized and committed board allows for a trickle-down effect throughout the schools, through the administration, down to the teachers. The board should maintain confidence and belief in all staff of the district, which will in turn turn towards the students. My evening availability is always wide open, and commitments for the board would be my priority. As a teacher, my daytime availability varies throughout the year. However, I do have flexibility with personal time. I believe the board and administrations in all schools should be present at events after school as well to show support and commitment. And as I do for the school I work at now, attending evening events and sports games would be an important priority for me as a board member. No matter what anyone's part of, there are always challenges, and I pride myself on the fact that when a challenge comes my way, I never let it stop me. I just work harder. I believe that in order to face any challenge that the board may occur over the year, it's important that a united front be present once any and all decisions are made, regardless of personal opinion. Teamwork and open communication among board members is also necessary. I would also always be sure to hear all opinions and sides before making any decision, and I would always do my best always do what was best for the students and district as a whole. I believe that my background as an educator brings a unique facet to the board. My niece and nephew attend schools here. They are an everyday part of my life. I've never missed an event for either of them, and I would do my best to give the same commitment to the district. I've seen each of them grow into amazing young people, and I would love to be part of that growth for all students. In regards to the board committees, I have in the past 3 years completely immersed myself through research and experience in the topic of social emotional learning. I've given several professional development courses on the topic, and I wholeheartedly believe in teaching the entire student. I was also an honored guest speaker at the Rutgers Boggs Center last year at their annual convention for research-based behavioral topics. In conclusion, I hope to have conveyed my passion for education and continuous betterment of schools, particularly Bernards Township. I feel that I can bring new and innovative ideas and concepts to the board in order to continually work for our students. Thank you for your time and consideration. I wish you all continued success.